So you say this guy what's his name? Rocco? What did he do?
Well, I mean, and he was a public figure. I mean, he used to have a blog called Whispers in the Loggia.
Yeah.
And he was basically like the Drudge Report of the Vatican. I mean, if you wanted anything going on in the Roman Curia, whether there was Vatican bank scandals or who the Pope had lunch with, I mean, this guy was a very forensic cataloger of things going on in the Vatican. And
is this before my time? No,
it might have been. It was back during the blogosphere heyday. And
I kind of remember. Then you said he came out and said he lived in the mom's basement.
Listen, it's not gossip. Wait, it's not gossip if they publicly put it out there, right, on their own blog. I mean, yeah. I mean, I always thought that was kind of, he was kind of, he'd smoke. That, that's kind of cool, Kevin. But then he put out there that he's still living at home. Like, and I never know why would you put that out there about yourself? It's just, I don't know. It's not a good look. It's less forgiving for men. I like the idea of women staying at home maybe until they get married because, it keeps them chaste. It keeps them protected under their father's watchful eye. And it keeps them protected in this world of human trafficking and OnlyFans. But, but for us guys, I mean, like if we're not out pretty much by 18, there's something going on there. There's something unmarriageable. There's something I would not want to bring this guy home to dad-ish going on there. And
so what happens after he revealed this? He just disappear or something?
It was I don't know if he thought it endeared himself to his readers or to the public, but it was always every time I would see that blog after reading that's the only thing I would think of. Like no matter how good his Vatican journalism was, the guy that's still living at home. Like if I still lived at home past a certain age, I would park around the block and jump the gate through my neighbor's backyards like they used to do in Boys in the Hood when they ran from the cops and sneak through my back door at 1 a.m. But that's just me. Like I know it's hard out there.
Do you remember this guy, Kyle?
Rocco Palmero or Rocco
Palmero.
He had a blog called Whispers in the Loggia. And again, this is all public information, so I'm not gossiping here. I mean, if they put it out and we talk about it, how's that gossip?
Yeah, it's already out there. We didn't.
I mean, yeah, his last post was it was September 29th, 2021 was his last post.
Okay.
And this is I'll just share this real quick. I mean, this is his this is his blog. If you guys remember the way it looked, this is the blog here. Whispers in the Loggia.
You remember that? Familiar.
It was a cool blog. I used to dig it. And again, I'd always still think of the I still living at home thing. I wish you'd have never said that because that's all I think about now when I see the blog. But hey, that's just how my mind works.
How did that come up? What was the context of?
I don't know. I don't know if he just thought it endeared himself to his readers or what, but he just published that he still lives at home and he was like in his late 20s, 30s at the time or something like that, which
I don't know. I have a different take on that. I think that we should do more of that actually. I think more families need to start living with multi-generational households. That's actually I think we should move back towards that. I think we're going to have to because people can't afford living houses anymore.
Exactly.
That's all over here. I mean, over here in Germany, and especially Venice, I mean, that's all I see. I mean, grown people living with their parents.
And
maybe
parents, it's a cultural thing.
Parents moving back in with their kids. That's all I see.
Yeah, take care of your parents. It's a very Catholic thing to do.
Oh, I could see that. But see, that's the other way around. That's mom and dad moving back home. That's not the same as moving back home with mom and dad. But maybe it's a cultural thing. I grew up in a different era. Maybe it is a cultural thing.
Well, that's the American thing. You move out as fast as you can. You go to college, 4-year school as fast as you can. You get away from parents. You be on your own, and you're independent. And that's kind of the American dream, right? I don't know. To some degree, I think we've been sold a bill of goods because if you look at human history, it's mostly been people living in multi-generational dwellings, whether they be houses or huts. you know, and that's
Yeah.
just kind of how
Yeah.
you stayed in your
Hey, let's
village.
do a mic check on Kyle. Sounds like you're a little bit in a
Yeah.
in
I
a-
think
in a-
the
in a,
wrong mic might be connected.
like you've been kidnapped a little bit and you're like in somebody's trunk.
Let me go. Okay, we got. Oh yeah. Looks like they're coming through my AirPods.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I mean,
Hold
my thing is this. I mean, I feel like in every
What do we
culture,
got here? Better?
still kidnapped in the trunk zone.
Hold on.
But no, while Kyle's doing that, I mean, you know, I don't know, man. I think every generation of civilization going back, there's always I'm speaking for men from the male perspective.
Yeah.
There always has to be a rite of passage, right? Like
Right.
if you go back far to humanity, there's always been a hard point in time when someone went from a boy to a man. Okay.
Right.
And I feel like the American version of that with advanced medicine, advanced technology, we're the safest country in the history of the, you know, I feel like the best rite of passage for men in the soft Western culture is getting out of the house ASAP. And if you think about all the moral exhortations in scripture, think of all the thousands of commands and moral exhortation. What's the very first one? The words of the Holy Spirit. Genesis 2:24. Get out of the house. Cleave to your wife. You know, a man leaves his mother and father and cleaves to his wife. So I don't know.
I think
applied
there
it
does
more
have,
to men than women.
I think there does has to be that transition especially for a man away from his father, because he has to figure out how to be a man away from his father. He does need to figure that out.
And from his mother. I mean, you know, I mean, it's true. And there's a word for that. They call it failure to launch, you know, or
failure to launch or cutting the apron strings.
Yeah. That's one thing I hated about Obamacare. Your children 26 and under could be on your health plan. It's like, that's like forced loserdom. Like that's old enough to be able to start fighting for your own health care, man. But they kind of codified, you know, kid autism.
I think you sound better.
We got mic check. We got better
night
sound coming in.
Oh yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Yep. I think we figured it out.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah, for those watching, this is what we call our fly on the wall segment, where we just kind of let it rip, kind of talk as if no one
This
were
is
listening.
the real. This is the real off code and unscripted.
It really is.
Here. Talk about that show. This is it.
And I would
speaking of that, I was next week I want to get you guys thoughts on this, since you know things that I do now since you're on the channel with me kind of affect you. So so next week it's kind of like in my craw that I've been seeing. I just don't think, if you're a major platform, right, if you're like a radio station or if you have a really huge following, I'm very uncomfortable with you platforming people who are telling people that they can't go to the Novus Ordo, and that they're leading people away from the church, right?
Mhm.
And I'm noticing that bigger radio stations are platforming people like Kennedy, platforming people like Dr. Peter K, who are telling people that the Novus Ordo doesn't fulfill their Sunday obligation. I mean, that's really.
Wow.
But at the same time, is that censoring? Is that? I mean, what do you think about that?
I mean, they're just straight up. It's not Catholic teaching, and they're misleading people. I mean, they are projecting their all or nothing mentality onto the whole world. If I can't hear the Mass in Tridentine, then I'm basically eating cookies, and I might as well be a home aloner instead of a contest like the Diamond Brothers. Because if I can't have the Latin Mass, then I shouldn't go to Mass at all. I don't like that.
But should we like say that if you're a huge platform, you shouldn't be like platforming people like that?
It would depend on why they platform them. If it's to debate the topic, platform the heck out of them and expose the flaws. But if it's to platform them just to sympathize.
But unfortunately, that never happens. They're always brought on in some sycophant fashion. Like, oh, Dr. K, who knows everything about everything. Dude's not even a theologian. He's a philosopher. I think he taught theology at the collegiate level, even without having a theology degree.
Yeah, most of these guys don't have theology degrees. They don't.
No,
They're either
they don't.
lawyers or philosophers.
You know what made me think that Kwasniewski was a theologian at first, though? Was the little pose on his Facebook profile where he's going like this.
Hey, isn't that like a Masonic symbol? What's that?
One must. I mean, he was in the heat. He was teaching something, boy. He was. That's when I thought he had his. That's when I thought he was smarter than the Pope. You know.
Hey Kyle, can you see the slide down at the bottom?
What am I looking for here?
It's like a slide that says like 7, 8, 9, 1, 2, 3.
Oh
4,
yeah,
5.
like a play bar. Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
the countdown.
No, it's like a slide. It actually says slide.
Yeah, I see that. No, I see that.
All right, that's our topics. I guess Bobby. As soon as I hit the intro, I guess Bobby is gonna go ahead and you ready, Bobby?
I'm ready.
All right. Knowing the partridge feel the spirits you sang to. Let's get this on the road.
So I'm kicking us off, right?
Yeah, let me play the intro. Let me play the intro.
Hello and welcome to the Final Word Podcast. We are the unholy trinity of David Gray, Kyle Kopy, and Bobby Hesley, where once or twice a month we like to hop on and kind of recap all the Catholic goings on, both culturally and politically and theologically and all of the above. And I want to wish everybody today a happy feast day of Pope St. Paul VI. Pope St. Paul VI, May 29th is his formal liturgical feast day. And a lot of people don't even realize that Paul VI was canonized a saint. In fact, if you go to the Laudate app, which is the app that I use when I go to daily mass for the readings, for the saint of the day, they haven't even updated his profile. They're still showing him as Blessed Paul VI, which is inaccurate. He is St. Paul VI. And in my opinion, and I hope there's SETIs and ultra-right conservatives watching, in my opinion, I think that Paul VI is probably the most courageous pope of the 20th century, in my opinion. And the reason why I say that is because there's a lot of firsts for him. He was the very first pope in church history to use his formal magisterium to actually speak out against homosexuality, against masturbation, against what people call the pelvic issues that a lot of people take umbrage with regarding Catholic teaching and human sexuality. He released a document called Persona Humana, which pretty much put to rest any idea that the church would ever relax her teaching, her infallible teaching on all those issues of cohabitation, fornication, masturbation, contraception. He was very clear in his condemnation of all those things. He didn't mince any words. And it's also interesting, too, that there's people in the church today, in an uproar about what Pope Francis said in an interview. He talked about baggotry, B as in boy. He talked about a lot of the prevalent baggotry.
I was wondering how we were going to deal with that word. I was like, what should I say?
I guess baggotry, but people see what the slide. Well, that was Dave's. Was that you, Dave?
Yeah, baggotry.
But folks, listen, baggotry is the fruit of the sterility of separating the unitive from the procreative. Because what is the difference between contraceptive heterosexual sex and sodomy? I mean, at the end of the day, they're both recreational disordered forms of sexuality that don't lead to procreation. And St. Paul VI was the first pope to condemn that. He also stood up against women's ordination. And I love the way he stood up against it, rather than saying, we don't want no women priests. Now go make me some eggs, right? Which is how people make him out to be, the evil patriarchy that just doesn't allow women priests. He basically, what's the word to use? He basically punted. He basically cried powerlessness and simply said, the church simply does not have the power to ordain women, right? So he played what I call the John 7:16 card. My doctrine is not mine, but his who sent me. So, hey, don't blame me, pal. I'm just the messenger. I didn't come up with this teaching.
Don't hate the player, hate the game.
Exactly. Exactly. So those were some important documents. So, just for our viewers, if you ever want to do some research on that, I would encourage you to look up Sacerdotes Celibatas, which is his reinforcement also of priestly celibacy in 1967. Obviously, in 1968, he wrote the very controversial, very prophetic encyclical Humani Vitae. And what's interesting, if I could go on a quick little tangent here, if anybody ever wants to see papal infallibility in action, Like, if you want to see a hard, concrete case of papal infallibility, look no further than Pope St. Paul VI. Because think about this, folks. When the birth control pill first came out, which, by the way, a lot of people just called the pill. It was actually called Inovid. That was the name of the pill when it came out in the 60s. And I don't know if you guys know this, but at the time, the FDA, when they approved Inovid, the very first birth control pill, nobody knew that it was an abortifacient. Nobody knew that. Nobody in the scientific community, nobody in the medical community knew that. It wasn't revealed until the 1980s that there's actually two functions of the Inovid birth control pill. The first one was the prevention of conception, right?
Or conception, yeah.
Yeah, it would prevent conception, which was what most people, ovulation was what they were wanting to eliminate, right? But if it failed to prevent ovulation, it would prevent implantation, which for those of you who don't know, that's a fertilized embryo, a human being, because life begins at conception, and it prevents it from implanting in the uterus, which induces a chemical abortion. So think about this, folks. If Pope St. Paul VI had gone Anglican on us and buckled like the Anglicans did at the Lambeth Council and said, well, you know what, guys, like all these liberals in the church, all these theologians in the church, they were waiting for their moment when they can finally allow contraception. And imagine if Pope St. Paul VI allowed it. He would have unknowingly permitted chemical abortion because it was 20 years away from being discovered that was the case. So that's a good example of the charism and papal infallibility, of how it's a negative charism. It doesn't necessarily inspire a pope to teach the truth, but it does prevent him from teaching error. Because imagine how the gates of hell would have prevailed had the chair of St. Peter permitted abortion, because that's what would have happened if he would have buckled. So Pope St. Paul VI, pray for us. And Kyle, I'll throw to you. What's your take on all that?
So that would be an example of the Holy Spirit in action in, I would say, the modern era, right? Because that is the operative force in the magisterial teaching that you're talking about here. It's the Holy Spirit stepping in to kind of like the Holy Spirit did with sacred scripture. Now, I'm not equating papal encyclicals with sacred scripture, but there is a similar type of action going on in terms of the Holy Spirit stepping in and preventing things from happening, to a certain degree, causing things from happening or to happen. When we think about the divinely inspired sacred scriptures, it wasn't as if the divinely inspired authors had this sort of line to God whispering in their ear, and they're just human dictators, they're typewriters, and they're just telling, they're writing down everything that the Holy Spirit told them. No, that's not how it works. They're using their own creative faculties, their own cultural conditioning, their own understanding of theology, and writing those things and only those things which the Holy Spirit inspired them to do. It's a very miraculous thing. It's a very mysterious thing how it all happens. And that's what was happening when St. Paul VI or whoever, Pope Francis, pens a magisterial document. The Holy Spirit is behind the scenes working in some fashion to prevent egregious errors from coming in, to prompt him to say the things that he needs to say for the culture and the time. So it's a beautiful thing. And the other unfortunate thing about that when it comes to Paul VI is that, as you mentioned, he is a saint, but we have all kinds of Catholics out there who are denying canonizations. This is a whole other topic, but people are denying these post-Vatican II canonizations of people like Pope St. Paul VI, and saying that, oh no, we changed the criteria and they're not really real and we can doubt them. No, actually, without getting into it totally right now, canonizations are infallible. These are certainties, and don't let anyone tell you differently. Think about that. If they weren't infallible and then we were praying to people who were potentially in hell, how does that affect the church? How have the gates of hell not prevailed against the church if we're telling people to pray to saints that aren't really saints?
And don't forget, every canonized saint requires a minimum of 2 miracles that have to be examined by non-Catholics, even atheists, that there's no medical or scientific explanation. And that happened with Paul VI. How about you, Dave? What do you think of our Pope St. Paul VI? In light of everything else going on.
This is very educational for me. I'm kind of blessed to have you guys see. I really never really put much thought into Paul VI, especially as a convert. You know, when I became Pope. when I became
first.
Yeah, you know, John Paul II, he was still the Pope, and then came Benedict. So I haven't really, other than the work I've been involved with in documenting the history of the church's opposition to Freemasonry, popes haven't really been much on my radar. So yeah, I just learned a lot just listening to you guys about John VI. I knew his influence on the document Humani Vitae. I knew his work there, but yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, definitely been blessed.
Absolutely. And to close out, like I said, I mean, the 20th century, we cranked out a lot of popes. I mean, I love Pope St. Pius X, but it's easy to have courage when all the priests and bishops under you are taking the oath against modernism and they're all in your corner. But imagine being a pope when everybody is opposing you. Priests are opposing you, cardinals opposing you, bishops, laity, scientists. So I adore the courage of Pope St. Paul VI. And one more little factoid is that I left out is that he soldiered on the Second Vatican Council. Imagine being a pope in the middle of an ecumenical council where the pope who called it, your predecessor, died, like months into calling it, or I'd have to research the chronology of that. But John the 23rd, who's also a saint, Pope St. John the 23rd. Yeah. He also he died very soon into Vatican II. So Paul VI, he had a lot on his plate. Think of everything going on in the 60s, right? You had the civil rights era, you had the sexual revolution, you had the nuclear arms race, you had Vatican II, you had all the cultural stuff, you had Woodstock, you had all this stuff going on in the 60s. And he's the leader of the largest religious organization on the planet, many of which were opposing him on these issues. So my hat's off.
But what are some, I mean, what would you say would be like some of his like because we could be critical as well. I mean, I admire how you've been quite glowingly in his the thing he's accomplished. But again, going back into the work I've done in documenting the church's opposition to Freemasonry, I did notice that some of the people, there was always a suspicion about him being a Freemason. I never found anything out like that. But some of the people who he had a position in key places, people like Annabelle Bagnini, people like Sepper, who's a CDF during the 70s. He was mainly responsible for, I think he was the first person of the Congregation of Doctrine of Faith to issue a letter, which is supposed to be private, to a bishop in Pennsylvania, that you can decide whether people in your diocese can be Freemasons or not. So it seemed to be that he did appoint some people and put some people in key positions that were not very helpful to holding fast to the doctrine of the faith.
Yeah, and what I would say that are two things. One, regarding Bonini, I mean, he was appointed originally by Pius XII. He was a Pius XII appointee.
So he was already in position.
Oh, right? Yeah, he was already in position. And let's say he did appoint him, whether it was on purpose or it was on accident. Let's say he appointed him on purpose. Let's say he said, you know what, I know this guy's a Mason. I've seen his Grand Lodge symbol. I'm going to appoint him anyway. There is precedent for that. Our Lord Jesus Christ appointed Judas, right? So even if there was a bad appointment, and I'm not saying Christ made a mistake, obviously he had higher motives and higher reasons why he appointed Judas. It was as a lesson to us to prepare us for, being portrayed by Judas Priest. But again, that goes back to the infallibility. Even if he was a Mason, you probably know better than me if he was or not. I know people say the same thing about St. John the 23rd, that he was quote unquote suspected of modernism. But I've never seen like any hard proof about that. Or if there was, I don't know. We've had bad popes. But we've never had a pope that taught heresy. We may have had a pope that believed it, or maybe was too sympathetic or too soft on it. But we're undefeated in that area.
Yeah. Or
we are 0 for 266.
Or we had a pope that was even holding to heretical things, but they weren't yet heretical because they weren't officially defined yet. So it was sort of like theological speculation at the time.
Sure.
If people want to learn more about the papacy, and I guess even more broadly the life of Pope Paul VI, there is a book that came out recently, or maybe it was translated into English recently, And I have some friends who have recommended this book to me. So I'm giving it kind of like a qualified couched endorsement here because I haven't read it myself, but I have friends whom I trust who have recommended this to me. It's called Paul VI, The Divided Pope by Yves Chiron, I think is how you pronounce his name. And it looks, I mean, from what I've seen of it, I've read the intro, I've read little excerpts of it. It seems to be pretty balanced as in terms of like David wanted to know, highlights and lowlights, criticisms and triumphs of Paul VI's papacy. So yeah, I mean, if people want to learn more, that is a contemporary book that's out there that's revealing a lot of new stuff. A lot of archival evidence has come forward. A lot of access has been granted to this author to kind of go through and do this sort of biography on Paul VI.
Yeah, and he also
one segue I was thinking about though, and what Bobby was thinking about, his when we did bring up the the whole Pope Francis and the Baggotry. This comes out in Pope, and it seems to be whatever how you pronounce the word in Italian, whenever it was said, it seems to be a genuine critique of what we all know to be true. That a lot of these seminaries are just straight up gay bathhouses, namely the North American Jesuits is one of them, right? So it's interesting that he did just point out just a plain fact. It was also interesting that when he had his whole 60 minutes interview and he's speaking to quasi-Catholic Nora Rodano, and she keeps trying to put him into these trick bags. If you guys notice, she kept asking him things that would, I think in the past, if Pope Francis was on an airplane, he would have just fell right into this, right, and said something that would have made us all angry. But in this interview, she asked him about female deacons. He says no. She says, well, you allow gay blessings. He said, no, what I did allow was blessing the person, not the relationship. And so lately, Pope Francis has really been out of character from what we used, from what we have seen in the past. So speaking of what you guys have been, in relation to what you guys have been talking about, St. Paul VI and the magisterial documents and all this, one thing that came to mind during this whole Baggotry thing was that maybe this is Pope Francis' Pius IX moment. Pius IX, he was a pope during he was the second longest pope. I guess next to Peter. So he comes in 1846. He leaves in about 1878, and early on, he was selected to be a liberal pope. People nowadays talk about the St. Gallen Mafia, how they put Pope Francis in. This is nothing compared to the machinations and the systems that are put in place to get Pius IX to be the Pope. And so he was that Pope for a while. He was a liberal Pope, did liberal things while there were still the Papal States. But at some point in time in his papacy later on, about the mid-length way, he seemed to just turn. A lot of things happened. He lost the Papal States. The Freemasons will at least Mario Giuseppe tried to kidnap him and kill him. And I think he realizes, man, this Baggotry isn't working out, right? And so he just flips, he just turns, and he becomes this, he writes a wonderful encyclical against Freemasonry. He becomes this conservative pope. So I'm wondering now, because over at St. Dominic's Media, you guys know I've written an essay about a timeline really about Pope Francis becoming the first gay pope. And I say this in a way that Barack Obama was the first gay president. Like, he had done so many gay things. The people who he appointed as bishops, the people he appointed as cardinals, the people who he met in private, the letters who he wrote. It's just a lot of Baggotry, just a whole lot of Baggotry ever since he became pope. But now I'm wondering, Bobby and Kyle, now I'm wondering, is this his Pius IX moment? Is he turning? Is he realizing that, man, this Baggotry thing just isn't going well? and I'm just gonna, I'm gonna do some things different from now on.
So, Dave, are you saying that you're kind of waiting on pins and needles for Pope Francis to publish a syllabus of Baggotry? Because that's what, what's interesting is that's what Blessed Pius IX ended up doing. He started off as a liberal, and he ended up formally condemning liberalism in section 10 of the Syllabus of Errors. So I don't know. I mean, hey, listen, people change, right? I mean, people, papal change.
I mean, we say, every mass we pray for a pope at every mass throughout the world, from the rising of the sun to its setting. Every mass is praying for the pope. I mean, prayers have to work.
I pray for his attention. I mean, I try to get as many indulgences as I can, and one of the catches is praying for the pope. But no, what do you think, Kyle? That's an interesting. Parallel.
Oh yeah, I mean, well, no, you mentioned first of all praying for the pope's intentions. I just want to make it clear to people, because I see this often, is that because we're supposed to pray for the pope's intentions as part of the Holy Rosary, right? Or, I guess you could just pray for them to obtain an indulgence, right? You say, Our Father, Hail Mary, glory be, for the Holy Father's intentions. This freaks trad Catholics out, because they're like, I don't know what Pope Francis's intentions are. I think he's a modernist and he's climate. Okay, yeah, I get it. But they don't know, they're not traditional enough to know that the church actually prescribes the intentions of the Holy Father. So you can go and look this up. You can look at what the church prescribes as the specific intentions of the Holy Father. It's not just his own personal intentions in his own head that he wants and that you're afraid of. It is, well, he does have a monthly intention. That's kind of an official Vatican thing, but more so the church has traditionally prescribed, I think there are 4 intentions. I don't remember what they are off the top of my head, but there's something like, it's basic stuff like the propagation of the faith, that, this is old school. So Christian princes would be good Christian leaders and whatnot. It's very basic stuff. So don't have any fear about saying the phrase, I'm praying for the Pope's intentions, because it's not what you think it is. It's actually good stuff necessarily. So that's just a side note there. But when it comes to Pope Francis, I think that, well, I don't know. I don't know if we're seeing I don't want to call it a conversion moment, because that's kind of a trad talking point too. I pray for the conversion of Pope Francis because he's not actually Catholic. No, the Pope is Catholic. He just has some things that we can and rightly do critique. But,
I pray that he invites Harrison Butker to the Vatican next month.
Exactly. Oh my goodness. Yeah. But no, I mean, Pope Francis, he's not what you think he is. That's the thing. When he first appeared to be leaning, and maybe did lean a little bit to the left on a lot of these issues. When he first came out there, the actual leftists in the culture were like, oh, this is our homie right here. This guy's going to change the teachings of the Catholic Church, and he's going to allow this, and he's going to allow that. But every time Francis takes a step in, an orthodox direction, he says something really good, and, then they get all up in arms. They're going to get up in arms about this. People are forgetting that he was basically upholding this 2005 Pope Benedict seminary admission policy. It still stands in the church that if you are a man and you have deep-seated, can I even say schlomosexual tendencies, if those are deep-seated in you, the SSA tendency, then you can't even be admitted to the seminary. I mean, I would argue that anyone who struggles with SSA, especially into adulthood, they're all deep-seated. I don't know a man, I have several friends who suffer from SSA, and barring some miracle from God, there's no converting. There's no flipping to the other side. They're going to deal with this for the rest of their lives. So if you're an adult and you suffer from SSA, that is your cross to bear. And unfortunately, you cannot enter into the seminary. And Pope Francis is upholding that. The secular people are going to freak out. This story is not going to go away anytime soon. They're going to freak out, and they're going to say, well, I thought Pope Francis is going to change the church. Nope, he's upholding this thing. So whether or not it's the bearer of some broader thing where he's going to start speaking out more, I don't know. I have a suspicion that Cardinal Fernandez, who's been really vocal, literally releasing a lot more documents through the DVDF, I think he is working closely with Francis. Obviously, they work closely together, but I think he is influencing Francis to be a little bit more vocal about these things, be a little bit more explanatory. Because, I mean, for the most, I mean, they let the Amoris Laetitia thing go forever, and there was like no explanation. Now all that stuff's getting resolved. The fiducia stuff is getting resolved. The other document, whatever, the blessing document, all that stuff's getting resolved. Like, they're very clear about what this stuff means now. There's not a lot of room to accuse them of ambiguity.
Yeah. And I wanted to bring this in. Thanks, Kyle. I want to bring this in because I think, what you said was a brilliant point that everybody needs to hear. That the only thing that Pope Francis has said is what the church has, had taught. I think he has a tendency to do that, and do it well. And, I think there's room for some criticism as well. But I think, we don't mention enough that he does a really good job of just repeating what the church teaches. But in response to, this, to the Baggotry, James Martin, the Jesuit, had said that in my past 25 years as priest and almost 40 as a Jesuit. Hold on, let me use my Baggotry voice. I've known hundreds of holy and faithful and celibate gay priests that have been my superiors, my teachers, my confessors, my mentors, my spiritual directors, and my friends. And if you're Catholic, they've celebrated masses for you. They've baptized your children. They've heard your confessions, visited you in hospitals. They presided over your weddings and buried your parents. The church would be immeasurably poor without them. My brothers, Kyle and Bobby.
Hey, Jimmy,
when I saw this,
I forgot about him blessing couples.
Right. But when I saw this,
that was my Mike Tyson.
The first thing that came to mind is that the church would have much more money if it wasn't for all the baggotry that had been going on even before Vatican II. Let's remember that the abuse of children that studies have documented has been largely men who have strong sexual attraction to younger boys. They are largely the ones that have been responsible for the abuse and the sexual molestation. So no, the church without them, without all this baggotry, the church would have much more money, and I think the church would be better off. I understand that you do have men with same-sex attraction who do not act on it, fine, but I would rather have 8 just men who are just sold out for Christ Jesus, who are pursuing holiness, than 80 with baggotry issues. But that's me. What
I just don't think it's a good idea to enter into any vocation, whether it be priesthood or marriage, if you're running on fumes. I mean, and that's what you're doing. You're setting yourself up for failure. I mean, if you're entering into, and let me kind of real quick dispel this myth that, because a lot of people, in my opinion, they like the gay priesthood thing. I feel like that's a cover for them to sneak in their way of eliminating celibacy, clerical celibacy. And they always say, well, if they would just eliminate celibacy, we wouldn't have all these cases of priests and minors and priests and young men. To which I reply to those people, well, if you think back at periods in your life when you were celibate, right? Can you think back to times in your life when you were not sexually active for an extent? Oh, yeah, most people can, right? And then I'll follow that up with a question. Okay, so during those times, did you have same-sex urges, or did you have urges to do things with minors during that time? And they look at me like I'm appalled. I'm like, thanks you. You just proved my point. That look on your face just proves my point. Celibacy does not equal edophilia, or I'm trying not to say the real word, but you guys see what I'm saying. So I think personally that James Martin is a Trojan horse. I'm not talking about the brand you get at gas stations. I'm talking about, he doesn't strike me as a guy that would use those. But the thing about him, and it's you got the Brian Massingales of the world who has been eerily silent. Has anybody heard from the black openly gay priest, Father Brian Massengale, who I would love to debate?
He has went silent. I haven't heard about him in over a year. That is interesting.
Yeah, his silence has been very violent. For his, that's the one. Silence is violent. But no, what do you think, Kyle?
Yeah, no, that isn't. I remember being on the Massengale scene, critiquing that guy. He was out and proud, and then he just went silent. What the heck happened there? I'm not complaining. I don't want to hear from the guy any more than I actually have to. I don't want him speaking at Fordham or wherever the heck he went, and he's talking all this nonsense. But yeah, I mean, getting back to the whole issue of admitting men to the seminary. I mean, the catechism's great on this. That 2005 document by Benedict is also great on this. And I just want to read a little bit from that 2005 document, which echoes what it says in the catechism. It says that, referring to people with SSA, such persons, in fact, find themselves in a situation that gravely hinders them from relating correctly to men and women. So they're pointing out here a very profound moral and psychological and social effect of people who deal with SSA. It is a fact that there is a disordered relationship, not only talking about sexually acting out, but even just in terms of normal human interactions, there is some type of inclination towards disorder there too. And a priest needs to be good at social interaction. So even if you have a priest who is not sexually acting out, thanks be to God, he might be suffering with SSA, but even if he's not sexually acting out, he's still not relating to men and women in the proper way. And he's a very public figure. I'm not saying like SSA people need to go live in a cave somewhere, but especially if you're a public figure, there's all kinds of room for disorder there. And it continues on. One must in no way overlook the negative consequences that can derive from the ordination of persons with deep-seated sexual tendencies. So the church is very clear on this. The church has spoken on this. I don't think there's any going back from this, although I think that maybe this was what precipitated Francis's meeting with the Italian bishops, which he thought was sort of behind closed doors, and he used this term. I am just flabbergasted that Pope Francis actually used that term. I mean, it's a bit of kind of locker room talk, right?
Oh, yeah.
You know, it's like, it's the stuff that we might say off camera. You know what I mean? It's the stuff that I might not say when my kids are around, type of thing. But it's like, guys hanging out, we're going to let some stuff drop. I mean, I remember reports within the past couple of years or so of Pope Francis, dropping F-bombs in some of these private meetings, unconfirmed reports. I'll just put that out there, but there's people who are saying that it's happened. I mean, people are going to, get mad. Popes get mad. Popes lose their temper, and popes use foul language from time to time. I'm not going to debate and say, oh, that's a great thing, but it does happen, and we kind of all fall into that. So, whether, and the last thing I'll say on this is that the apology was a non-apology. So the Vatican actually put out an apology for Pope Francis using this term, is a quasi-apology. The Vatican press office said that Pope Francis never intended to offend or express himself in homophobic language. First of all, it's not homophobic. No one's afraid of these people.
Exactly.
They're not a boogeyman hiding under your bed. It is, you could call it an anti-gay slur. That's as far as I'll go. But I'm not calling it that stupid term. I shouldn't even say it's shlomophobic. And Francis extends his apologies to those who felt offended by the use of the term, which was reported by others. So it's saying like, oh, I'm sorry you're offended, versus saying what I said was wrong. So the apology, maybe it gets lost in translation from whatever it was, Italian to English, but the apology basically says, I'm sorry that you were offended. I don't take it back, but I'm sorry that you didn't like it.
No, very well said, Kyle. And just to give kind of a practical spin to what we're saying, because I don't want anybody thinking that the Catholic Church is cruel and insensitive and discriminatory and hates gays and thinks that they're unworthy and they can't serve God. It is a fundamental principle of Catholic moral theology that we are to avoid the mere occasion of sin. And that's the lens through which you have to look at this topic we're talking about, folks, because think about it. If you are a Latin Rite priest who takes lifelong vows of celibacy, you are 0.000001% of the population. You are choosing to be a solitary pilgrim for the rest of your life with an indelible mark of holy orders on your soul that can never be erased, whether you end up in heaven or in hell. And if you think about that, you don't have many other people you can fellowship with except other men, except other priests. So if you struggle with SSA, which for those of you who wonder what that means, it's an acronym for same-sex attraction. You're setting yourself up for an occasion of sin, because it's kind of like the guy who struggles with pornography, right? He may not be called to marriage, or before he's gets married, he has to go through a lot of reform in order to root out that disorder tendency, right? And if you're conferring with fellow priests that are walking this lonely path, that's where a lot of it goes on. I think it's just people that have those same-sex tendencies. It's not a good idea to have them all in the room together unless they're at like a courage meeting or something, or a SSA anonymous meeting or something.
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you think, Dave?
I mean, speaking of like a lot of men with same-sex attraction who are like in the same room together, the Jesuits. So Amathoria, she had posted this question, said, what do y'all think? And I love that you say y'all, Amathoria. That's my language from, Northeast Ohio. What do y'all think about Father Jops Moon, Jesuit, who posted on X that Pope Benedict was probably homosexual? So I had never heard of this. So, while I went and looked on the x.com, and I seen that our friend Robert Nugent had done a video on it. I haven't watched it yet, but here it is. This is what Amathoria had asked about. He says, this is a long post. He goes through several things here. And he says, in my second point, let's face reality. And let's be thankful, he says. There are many gay seminarians, priests, and bishops. My estimation, at least half in the Vatican and in your parish. And then he goes on to drop names, right? He says Pope Benedict was probably gay. The same for John Henry Newman or G.M. Hopkins. And I'm disturbed to see that a priest would even dare to write this in the public space.
Sounds like he's hoping they were gay.
And then slander people who are dead, not with us, who cannot defend themselves. It's calumny, it's gossip. It's just nasty. It's not even befitting a priest, first of all. And second, these Jesuits in North America, they just remind me of people who live in the NPR news, the CNN bubble, right? Who's just shocked that Donald Trump won. I think when you live in these gay bubbles, I think you just think everyone is gay. You think everyone is like you. And so I kind of look at it in that context, Amathoria. What you got? What was y'all's thoughts when you saw this?
Well, they do this too. I'm surprised he didn't mention, but people like this tend to do this with Fulton Sheen too. I've seen people accuse Fulton Sheen of being gay. Why? Because he was a product of the television era that he grew up in, a product of his culture in terms of presentation. He was a bit theatrical in the way he presented himself on TV, and it wasn't understood back then, but now it's a sort of a stereotype. Oh, that's the way gay men act. And so they're like, oh, Fulton Sheen must have been gay. And people just assume that that's true. Yeah, exactly. And then too, I was wondering, we were reading that last X post by Father Jimmy Martin, SJ. I want to know what he means by gay priests, because he just uses the term and he doesn't define it. Does he mean merely men who happen to have been ordained, they got through the seminary somehow, no one noticed or whatever, and they struggle with SSA and they're trying to fight it and they're living chastely? Or does he mean the Father Massengales out there, the ones who are out and proud and celebrating it and acting like nothing is wrong with themselves and just admit it? I mean, there's disorders about each and every one of us, whatever we struggle with those type of people. It happens to be SSA. Everyone's got their cross to bear. Is that who he means? The people that are advocating for change in the church, the people that are trying to reinterpret the Bible to make it mean what it doesn't mean, and that it really upholds, whatever it is, that it's okay, it's moral, SSA actions. So I don't know. Yeah, that's where I'm at with it.
I mean, okay, let me start from the bottom, and then I'll go to the top. Starting from the bottom, I just think it creeps me out to see a guy publicly speculating where dead men stuck their penises while they were alive. That's the first thing that's kind of gay. But secondly, to his post, I would say Father Josh Moons, even though I know he probably wouldn't want to be called father because he's a Jesuit. Quality over quantity. If half seminarians are gay, then I'll take half the priesthood, like the ungay half. And I'm not saying that to be like mean against gay priests, but the fact is, you have to be called, whether it's to priesthood or marriage. It's a calling. You have to be equipped to live that life. And again, I really think you're setting yourself up for failure if you take lifelong vows of celibacy struggling with that same-sex attraction. I think you should stay as a layperson. I think it's more act of integrity. And I think there's less room for collateral damage. I mean, if there's an airline pilot and there's a 1% chance that he could have a psychotic episode and nosedive the plane into the ground, I wouldn't want to be on that plane with that pilot. I don't care that there's a 99% chance he might not. I'm worried about that 1% chance. What if it's my unlucky day? And I just think no matter how chaste an SSA man lives, and God bless them for living that way, if they embrace that calling, if they embrace that vocation, there are other people that are going to get hurt. Not only are you going to hurt yourself, but you're going to hurt lots of other people. There's very little room for error. You are tight walking a rope with a 10,000 foot fall if you take a misstep. And I just don't think it's worth the risk. And that's the heart of that 2005 document and the heart of Pope Francis' recent Baggotry interview.
Yeah. In your comment, man, about people just living if you have same-sex attraction, right, if you have some sort of issues with sexual purity, I love your point that you said about, well, you should suffer with that. You should live a private life. You don't have to have a ministry. You don't have to have that type of, you don't have to pursue the sacrament of holy orders. You have to pursue the sacrament of marriage. Don't feel pressure to marry. If you're really struggling with this, maybe the solution isn't just to marry a woman, to so-called get over it. Maybe God is calling you to a different path to really work out your salvation through consecrated singlehood. But one thing that you do not do, right, I don't think, is one, if you feel called to be a hermit, and hermits they can be a man or a woman, they take vows of obedience, poverty, and chastity. Hermits they ought to, I think, this is canon law, they just live a life that is a life of solitude, a life away, right? You think of the Desert Fathers, people had to travel to go see them. Hermits are not people that you just run into on the street, right? They're not people that they're not out evangelizing. They're not like Father David Nix, who, he says he's a hermit. They don't have YouTube channels. They're not on Avoiding Babylon all the time. They just don't, hermits are people who should be working out their call to salvation and holiness and solitude, right? But you had this so-called hermit who is a biological woman in Kentucky who some years after their conversion, they thought this woman wanted to use evangelize through music, and that really didn't work out. This woman was seeking spiritual advice. They had a spiritual director, and the spiritual director was saying, well, maybe the path you need is to be a hermit. And what you need to do is you need to find a bishop who will support that path. And what happened next was this woman did what a lot of people do in the legal system. They go judge shopping. You find a judge in the legal system that you think will be friendly to your case. And what this woman did, last name Casey, I believe, what she did was she went bishop shopping, and she found a bishop in a diocese of, is it Lexington? And Bishop Stowe, I believe, right? And she finds this bishop who is friendly to her cause to become a hermit, and so she becomes a hermit. Now she has more hair on her face than me, right? And now at Pentecost, the Bishop Stowe has allowed her to come out and tell the world that no, I'm not what God created me. I'm actually a man. Even though I'm biologically a woman, I'm going to represent myself as man face, and I'm going to call myself brother. I'm brother hermit, right? And so this news had really shocked. I think the Catholic sphere. The story was all over secular news, and it happened at a time coming right before sodomy, what they call sodomy month, the so-called gay pride month. It comes on before Pope Francis makes this statement, right? And so I think there's a lot of commentary that can be made about Bishop Stowe. There's a lot of things that can be said about this whole thing, right? But my final word on the subject really is that what made me most upset, Bobby and Kyle, about the story when I read it, is that this woman in the article from Religious News Service in the interview said, "Deal with it. You have to deal with us. That we're not going anywhere." That pissed me off like nothing else. Like, why in the hell do I have to deal with a mental disease, with psychosis? I don't have to deal with that. I think these people always feel so freaking entitled to force their sexual deviancy, their psychosis, their mental disease on us and force us to accept something that's abnormal as normal. I don't have to deal with this, and I don't have to accept your bishop's decision to have you out here evangelizing. I don't have to like that. I don't have to accept that, and I don't have to deal with it. And that just pissed me off like nothing else.
I mean, we should make a t-shirt. You heard it here first, folks. You're not entitled to my perception. I mean, that strikes at the heart of this tea movement, is that it's forced. They're forcing us to perceive them the way they want us to perceive them. And I guess my question to this woman is, and yes, it's a woman, is if I were to show up at this convent or at this diocese or, where or monastery, I guess in this case, right? And if I were to show up, let's say I showed up as a convent and I'm a guy, I got I'm Bob, right? Deep voice, silky voice. And I just decided that day that I identify as the mother superior of that content, of that convent. And I show it with my suitcases and I say, I identify as the mother superior of this content, of this convent. Would the acting mother superior of that pro-trans convent retire and let me supplant her and take her place? Because that's how I identify. And would she be mother superior phobic if she pushed back against that? Would be my question. What do you think, Kyle?
Well, there definitely is, as David said, a weird, not even weird, it's obvious narcissism. What's going on here? This could have all been secret. If they really cared about the public perception of the church, if they really didn't want to push an agenda, and I'm talking about Bishop Stowe, and I'm talking about this woman in man-face, Christian Mattson, who, by the way, do you know how old she is? Does anyone know? Take a wild guess. How old do you think that woman looks?
I would say 53.
Exactly. I was gonna say, oh, this is like someone in their 50s, probably. 39 years old.
Stop.
That I swear that's what I swear it's what's being reported. Maybe they're fudging the numbers.
Are they trans age? Are they a trans ageist?
I was gonna say, yeah, maybe they're I identify as a 39-year-old, but I'm really 54. It might be that type of thing. But 39 years old, I'm like, no way this person looks like they're middle age or something like that.
So anyway. balding comes with these trans drugs? Is that, you get a bald spot? Well, you get hair and lose hair.
Yeah,
that's
how'd
crazy.
they pull off the beard? I mean, did they take hair off the top of her head and put it on there? Like, was it?
I don't know what. I don't know where they took the hair from. I don't know. I don't want to know where they took that hair from and put it on that woman's face. I mean, looking at the, I keep wanting to call it a dude, you know, but it is a woman. After all, I guess they did a good job of getting like overweight middle-aged man. Anyways, okay. So back to this. There is a narcissism here going on. In all seriousness, there is a narcissism here going on. This could have all been kept secret because this is not a recent so-called transition. This is not a recent attempt. This thing was attempted medically in 2010 while she was in college. She claims to have medically transitioned over 10 years ago, nearly almost 15 years ago now. So it's like, why do you choose to reveal it now? Aren't you supposed to be a hermit? Aren't you supposed to live a secluded life? And you set a date for your announcement as well. I mean, she was apparently baptized on Pentecost. So it's a really special day for her. And I'm going to make this announcement, 14 years later after I transitioned. Who cares? First of all, it's to push this agenda. And I'm very, very disappointed. I'm not surprised, but I'm very disappointed in Bishop Stowe because he's just embraced this whole narrative. Unfortunately, a good bishop would speak out against it and say, I'm not even talking about this publicly. And, if there's someone who decides to live as a hermit within my diocese, they're well within their rights to do that. They're not going to be diocesan level recognized as a hermit. I don't even know what that would be canonically. But Stowe's just totally embracing it. And secular media is asking Bishop Stowe, hey, is this the first ever trans hermit out there? And he's like, I don't know. It might be the first. He's acting like it's a big game. And the other egregious thing is that Bishop Stowe allows the Blessed Sacrament to be reserved in her dwelling. I think she said she lives in some, So she said she lives in some cabin in the woods somewhere.
Yeah. And, as a hermit should.
I'm like, well, dude, stay. I mean, or not dude, girl, stay there. Yeah, exactly.
So why couldn't she have stayed just like a consecrated virgin? That was an option, right?
I guess. I don't know. I don't know what the backstory is there in terms of, she was rejected by, I don't know if she tried to enter these other convents or monasteries pre or post transition. That's really where it's kind of unclear. She was rejected by the Jesuits. If the Jesuits reject you,
just give up. Become Anglican at that point. That's crazy.
To answer your question though, Kyle, think about this, folks. You got to put on your detective hat, right? And what's the old classic saying of detectives? Detectives are not allowed to believe in coincidence, right? So to apply that to this, you have a quote unquote hermit getting on social media saying, deal with me. They call that a paradox, right? That kind of contradicts itself. We shouldn't even know this person exists. That's the whole point of being a hermit.
Yep.
But the other thing too is I think the timing of this, you said 15 years. Dignitatis Infinita did just come out, and I think if we want to talk about cruelty, I think it's the cruelty of Bishop Stowe. I think Stowe is behind this. If I were a detective that's not allowed to believe in coincidence, my detective brain would say, this is Bishop Stowe using this poor mentally ill person as a pawn, as a literal queen on his chessboard to speak out against Dignitas Infinitus, which addressed the issue of transgenderism. I think he's trying to put the anti-face of that against that. Like he's trying to personify the opposition to that by preying on this poor person's psychosis to kind of be his mascot. That's what I think he's doing.
Yeah, it does seem like
it doesn't make sense.
It does. I want to be fair to Stowe, but I used to work in Catholic media professionally. I know a lot about Stowe. He has a bad track record. We'll just say it.
Even if it was a woman coming out as a woman, just the idea of saying, deal with me, I'm a hermit. That's like, would they expect us to speak back in our Miss Piggy voice and say, "Oh, Hermie," it doesn't make sense.
No, it really doesn't. I'm really upset. I mean, that's the
It's a
strongest I
mascot.
can say.
It's a
It
mentally
is.
ill mascot that Bishop Stowe is trotting out against Dignitas Infinitus, in my opinion.
And Stowe was asked about why he's letting this go on in his diocese. And he's like, it's okay because, well, he uses he, but it's a she. She's not ordained. So I don't have to follow any of the church rules when it comes to like we were talking about seminary admission for people with disordered sexuality. It's not like he's an ordained person or anything. So he's trying to purposely find this loophole. And, even if she was trying to go into a monastery or a convent with whatever she identified for with that day, Stowe was like, oh yeah, it's, she's living alone. It's not like she's in some sex segregated dwelling with other monks or nuns or whatever the identification is. Hermits live a secluded life, Stowe said. But this is not a secluded life. This is a public story. This is right there in our faces. And I suspect it's on purpose to kind of push this agenda.
Yeah. And Stowe, like you said, he's technically right. It is canon law. This is under the purview of the bishop about this, how a hermit can consecrate themselves to the three vows of obedience, poverty, and chastity. But when this woman, Matson, when they made those vows, how did they make them? I think that's a lingering question out there. Did they take these vows under the person of who God created them to be, or under the auspice of this fictional man that they're pretending to be, or was it a gender neutral vow? So there's some questions here about, did they even take the vows, the three vows, to be a hermit? Because I think this, am I, I guess I'll throw it out there to you two. Does that, you think, would their vows be invalidated if she took the vows as a man?
I think
or do we even know more about whether these things are gender or specific or not?
Think about this. Think of the vow of chastity, right? How can you live out the vow of chastity, which is to honor God with your sexual organs, if you're trying to add organs you weren't born with, or mutilate and chop off organs you were? Right. That's the heart of that vow, honoring God with my reproductive organs, right? I just think it's a diabolical, satanic mockery of transubstantiation, because if you break down the Latin word, trans means change. Substantiation means substance. It's to change substance from bread and wine into body, blood, soul, and divinity. And I think this, just like we used to hear people say that, abortion is kind of a perversion of the incarnation, right? It's a diabolical perversion of the words, this is my body, right? Like that's the heart of abortion, right? This is my body. I can do what I want with it. Well, I feel like this is a perversion of, in a similar way, of transubstantiation, because unlike transubstantiation, a mutilation does not occur during transubstantiation. Whereas during whatever procedure she may or may not have had, it requires a mutilation of some kind, whether it's a hormonal mutilation or whether it's an actual physical mutilation of chopping off or removing or adding or taking away. And I just think the devil hates the human body, because it was the human body of Christ that conquered him on Calvary. So if there's any way that he can vandalize or deface or attack or get revenge on the human body that was the vessel of his defeat, it's through the trans movement.
So when it comes to this idea of valid or invalid vows, that's an interesting one to bring up. I never considered that outside of a sacramental context. We talk about sacraments being valid or invalid. For instance, using the wrong matter or the wrong form or something like that could invalidate a sacrament. I don't know if that applies to vows so much, so that would be something interesting to look into. But what Bobby said hit the nail on the head about this sort of perversion and mockery of the sacraments, specifically transubstantiation. And in a bizarre way, Christian Matson, this woman, confirmed what you were just talking about, because she said that she transitioned. This is bizarre theological reasoning here. She said that she transitioned because of the Catholic sacramental understanding of the body. Think about how perverse that line is. So I imagine in her mind, it goes something like this. Oh, well, the Eucharist can, the bread and wine can change into Jesus, so I can change into anything else. That's if I was to try to understand it from her perspective, that's what I would assume she's thinking. But think about how diabolically perverse that is.
But it has to be confected by holy orders in order for that to happen. So that's apples and oranges if that's what's in her mind.
Yeah.
Bombardier says the Desert Fathers were so holy, and now we have this corrupt, self-centered, demonic claiming to have left the world. I mean, she nails it right there.
And in her mind, she thinks she's left the world, but she's really left reality, because that's what transism is. It's a war on reality. I mean, if I was convinced that if I walked around trying to convince everybody that I'm Napoleon Bonaparte, and that if they don't agree that I'm Napoleon, if they're not willing to take me to Notre Dame to crown me as Emperor of France, that I have a right to sue them for their refusal to do that, you would want to put me in an insane asylum. Like, that's where I would belong. I would belong in therapy and on medication and on spiritual direction. But these people, they belong on the cover of Sports Illustrated. That's just the culture we live in.
But
and Lisa says that she is breaking the vow of obedience, and I think that's a great point as well, because it's sort of like a man who, or any person. We could go back to Kyle's point of it being, a type of, even though it's not a sacrament, we could look at it through the lenses of a sacrament. This obedience piece is that how can she be obedient to God by living in a state of disobedience? And so, is marriage actually ever valid, or have been terms been fulfilled of the sacraments if there's never conjugal love? No. And so, in the same way with this woman, is that how can she ever claim to have fulfilled the vow of obedience if she's living in a state of disobedience?
And on multiple levels, living in a state of disobedience to the order of nature. I mean, we're supposed to obey the order of nature as practice to obey the order of grace, right? Natural law is the precursor to divine law. So if you've got it spectacularly wrong, just observing the natural law of your biological gender that you're born with, how are you going to even try to live a life of obeying the divine law if you can't even get it right on that?
Yeah. I mean, Brian Holdsworth just put out a video about him removing some of his old YouTube videos because of obedience. He discovered, he was doing some theological reading, and he realized that one of the chief virtues, I forget, what he was reading and what context it was, but he said one of the chief virtues to develop and work on is the vow of obedience. And you think about that from a little child's perspective. That is the virtue that little children need to cultivate the most, right? Because their whole life is obedience at that point.
Mm-hmm.
They're being obedience to their elders, whether they be their parents, their teachers, their extended family members, their grandparents. And we kind of forget that into adulthood, especially as Americans, because we're so revolutionary and we want to be, self-made and cowboys and all this stuff like that. And to some degree that's good, but we forget about, well, I just need to be obedient to, in all things, not in anything sinful, obviously, but there's legitimate stuff that your hierarchs in terms of your workplace asks you to do. That's one example of it. The other thing I wanted to quickly mention was, we had a couple comments ago talking about the fact that this woman has left the world. I would say, but not really, because she's not just in the hermitage in her little cabin. She's, there we go, claiming to have left the world. Yeah, it's just a claim because it's not true. She hasn't actually done so, because she works half the day, or at least she used to, but I think this is still going on. She works half the day. She has a job. She goes and works in, you guessed it, a theater. as a writer,
Oh yeah,
and
that's
as
right.
a producer. I mean, you talking about stereotypes for the type of job that these people want to get involved with. So I just kind of thought I would mention that. And and lastly, getting back to what David was saying about, oh, you got to deal with this. You got to deal with us, right? That's what Mattson said. You have to deal with this because God has called us into his church, and it's not your church to kick us out of. It's God's church, and he has engrafted us onto it. But people like this who use this line of reasoning always forget that God, yes, calls everyone into the church, but you have your end of the bargain to hold up if you want to remain in communion with that church. And people like this are not holding up their end of the bargain in terms of obedience to the laws of God.
They want all the privilege of church membership with none of the responsibility.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think that's the final word. You guys nailed it. But there's this other, speaking of this whole thing about, man, I really like this story that came out. I think it was a couple weeks ago. You may have seen it on my show or my on Off Code Unscripted. I had a guy on there. His name was he goes by his YouTube channel is the Blue Collar Catholic. His name is Rob, and Rob, this is his parish, and so this is my first time hearing about it. And he tells a story about how this woman had come to receive communion. She's not properly dressed. Maybe the priest knows her from a previous incident or knows something about her. And so he denies her communion. And so the woman comes back to the line a second time. And, the priest asks her, did you go to confession? And apparently the woman says, well, none of your business. And then she proceeds to grab Jesus Christ, like snatch him as an assassin, just puts her hands into the and so the priest doing his job to protect the sacrament, does all he can do to both protect it from just Jesus going everywhere, like and so he he does what a Florida man would do, right? When we think of Florida man, he reaches out and bites her like an alligator. And so that's the story. So a Florida priest accused a biting woman who was trying to take communion, and apparently he was charged with some sort of assault misdemeanor or something like that. So I was really proud of this priest when I heard the story. And I just wish, of course, hopefully things never escalate to this. There's some things going on with this woman, apparently. But I wish all priests would, and the laity, those, who dare be Eucharistic ministers, would be more protective and guard Jesus more well. That's my thoughts on it.
Yeah, and I think the quickest shot in the arm to prevent that is stop distributing on the hand. And this is coming from a Novus Ordo Vatican II lover. Just quit giving on the hand, because now I don't know the context of the story because I have been too busy to kind of keep up, but did she rush and try to wrestle it out of there, or was he giving it to her on the hand and she didn't put it in her mouth soon enough?
No, he's refusing it to her because
Yeah.
she was not worthy of communion for some reasons that he would know.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm curious if this priest, if blue collar Catholic, does he give communion on the hand? I'd be curious on that, because to me that would kind of cut away some of his heroicness.
Yeah.
Yeah. This, from what I understand, this woman had shown up for one of her family members, maybe her niece's first communion, and she showed up with her same-sex partner. So the priest didn't recognize her. When she approached the first time, she didn't have hand out. She didn't have mouth open. So he's like, why are you walking up here? And so it was very, very obvious that she was in the wrong place, right? It's like, you don't know anything about the Catholic Mass. Why are you walking up for communion? So the priest recognized that right away and denied her. They had about a minute conversation that held up the entire communion line, and then she left. She, from what I understand, she came back to the church at a second Mass, sort of as an act of protest, and came up for the communion line, got into an argument with the priest, and she was like, she said something bizarre, ridiculous. She's like, she told the police, I just wanted a cookie. I just wanted one of those cookies. So think about the disrespectful language there, talking about the Holy Eucharist. It reminds me of that old Bernie Mac bit in the Kings of Comedy about, I want some milk and cookies.
Some wine and cookies.
His niece going in the refrigerator. Exactly. So that's why I imagine this woman is. Yeah. So, she actually got her hand in there. She crushed some of the hosts up, make some reparations for this woman. The priest pulls away. Okay. Yeah. I'm all for, I commend this priest for wanting to protect the Blessed Sacrament. I think it's bizarre as all hell that he bit her. I mean, I get it. Like both of his hands were on the ciborium. He's trying to take it away. All you got is your mouth. I don't know. You have your legs too, man. I don't know if he couldn't, get a leg up there, get that side kick, get that roundhouse going in her face or something like that, or bob and weaving.
Kyle, who do you think the priest is? I mean, the guy looks old. He's not Walker, Texas Ranger. Come on.
I didn't see it. He's all okay. I didn't see how old he was.
Who was the bishop? I mean, here's the thing. There is legal precedent that would give him protection. Was it Bishop Coakley in Oklahoma who sued? Who is the bishop who sued when somebody desecrated? They broke into a Catholic church. They stole a tabernacle. This was 7-8 years ago. And the bishop successfully sued. They tracked down who the thief was. He sued them and he argued that it was desecration of religious items that belong to the religion. So that'd be like breaking into a mosque or breaking into it'd be like breaking into a Jewish synagogue and stealing what do you call the candle stands they have. It could be considered a religious artifact or a religious item. So he would have had some legal protection, but on the surface, and again, I'm unqualified because I didn't really follow the story as close as I should have, but the biting thing definitely threw me like that, and again, we're armchair quarterbacks. We're watching the UFC fight, telling Brock Lesnar how she protect himself.
Which I've been in, when I was younger, I was in a lot of, little street fights in Warren, Ohio. I think my last fight even was, I had to be in my late 20s.
I thought you were about to say like a couple months ago.
No. Over here in Germany, give me that brochure. No. But listen, I've been in fights where biting was acceptable. We're just on the ground. Like, no, I'm gonna bite you. But sometimes that's the best way out of a headlock. So I think biting is perfectly acceptable. I mean, ask Mike Tyson or ask Evander Holyfield, right? I don't know.
Yeah. I guess what makes it weird to us, and again, we're so used to seeing priests not care about this stuff, that when we finally see a priest that does defend the Eucharist, I guess maybe that's what made it weird to me, is it's so rare. It's such a Bigfoot UFO. I feel like I saw Bigfoot riding the Loch Ness Monster on horseback while being beamed up by a UFO. Like reading that story, it's just so rare, man. It's so mythical.
Yeah. And it's sad what Lisa says. Lisa says it needs to be announced before each mass the requirements for receiving Holy Communion. In one sense, I'm like, yeah, but in another sense, I'm like, no, because I think that's a little bit distracting to the liturgy. So,
how annoying would that be every time they announce it? Like every single mass, every Sunday mass. Oh, they're making that announcement again. I get it, but I don't know. They usually announce it like at weddings, or they announce it at Easter and Christmas, when people who don't usually attend.
I mean, if anybody is scandalized by just the whole, let's look at the whole premise of this story. Let's take it theological for a second. We've been talking a lot about Pope Benedict XVI. I would encourage everybody to read a book that he wrote while he was Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger called God is Near Us. It's a book he wrote about the Eucharist. One of the best books I've ever read about the Eucharist, actually. And he said that we should not be scandalized by the fact that certain people are excluded from the Eucharistic meal. And the reason why is because Jesus set the tone for that. We're imitating the example of Jesus. And he used the point that if you look throughout Jesus' public ministry, one of the things that made Jesus revolutionary is the people that he was willing to dine with. He dined with sinners. He dined with tax collectors, prostitutes, Pharisees. He was open for business to everybody during his public ministry. But there was one meal he had that was extremely exclusionary. It was a family meal, and that was the Last Supper, which we know as the first Mass, right?
Yeah.
And he decried this myth that, oh, we should invite everybody to communion, because how can we expect people to be better if we're not willing to give him the medicine, right? To give them the medicine to be better. To which Pope Benedict said, and I have so much respect for him saying this, is he said that that's a fundamental misunderstanding of the sacrament of the Eucharist when we think that we should just give the Eucharist to everybody in hopes that that will change the world, because he said that you're reversing it. He said the Eucharist is not the sacrament of reconciliation. We actually have a sacrament for that. It's called Sacrament of Reconciliation. He said the Eucharist is not the sacrament of reconciliation. Rather, it is the sacrament of the reconciled. You have to be in a state of grace. And the only people that are welcome at the Lord's table are those who are in a state of grace, because it is not the sacrament of reconciliation, but like the Pope said, it's the sacrament of the reconciled.
Yeah. What did y'all think of? We never gave our final word on Harrison Butker. What was as they're wrapping up? I think everything is kind of calmed down now. I think I was talking to you sometime. I think maybe back channel we were talking. I was just mentioning how I was really just tired of him being on my Facebook feed. It went on for like almost 10 days, because I have a bunch of trad friends, and this is like he's like a demigod to them. So, but now that it's been almost 3-4 weeks. What's your final word on the Harrison Butker phenomenon?
I mean, all the trads that hate clapping during Mass, which I hate too. I wonder what would happen if he walked into one of their masses. They would clap like they might break that one rule. No, I just thought it was funny to see the traddies and the setties fighting over it. Like, it was just
like,
funny
I didn't see that fight. What was that fight?
Okay. So trads were trying to claim it as one of ours. Like, yeah, look at ours. Look at our Captain America. This is us. He finally represented us. We finally have our platform, right?
Yeah.
And then there was some set of a contest, and you got to kind of search to find them because they are kind of a fringe group, although they are growing. They were wanting no part of them because obviously he accepts Pope Francis, he accepts Novus Ordo, even though he kind of took a shot at the Novus Ordo in his speech, which I took some umbrage with. But it's just so funny how people fail to just watch the freaking talk and listen to what he said himself. He didn't say that motherhood was superior. He said it's one of the most. He didn't say it's the only. He said it's one of the most, like word for word. I mean, I didn't agree with everything he said, but I thought it was interesting, and I posted this, how all of a sudden everybody wants to define a woman now, now that he gave that speech. I mean, the guy choked up when he talked about his wife. He attributed his success to his wife. He said that he was successful because of his wife, not in spite of his wife, as the Andrew Tates of the world would say. So I don't know. I mean, I didn't agree with everything. I thought it was a good speech, but I thought that I think that he is like a Tim Tebow who actually knows how to play football.
At least kick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're calling him Harrison Butt Kicker.
What did you think about one of the pushbacks that you would hear? Well, let me give you two of them. Number one, this guy makes a lot of money. Like most football players, yes, his wife stays home. Okay. They can afford it. The second thing was that his critique of the Novus Ordo, his promotion of the TLM, seemed to be rather local. For a person who makes as much money as he do, he doesn't seem to use his passport. He doesn't seem to go to places like the Philippines, Costa Rica, Honduras, Nigeria, where the Novus Ordo is working really well. And so his things that you got to get to traditional Mass because it's proper and right worship, right? What were your two thoughts on that? Women who some women have to work. Some couples do, just because in the United States we have an economy that's been structured as such. Depending upon where you live, depending upon how many kids you have and how much daycare costs, there's just some factors there that United States sometimes you do need two incomes. And so either the man is going to work his butt off He's going to prove himself, get a trade. You know, he's going to just do everything he needs to do so that his income can suffice to raise a larger family, or it's going to be two incomes. I just think that's different for a kicker who makes all the money.
Yeah, it's a little bit out of touch for a guy who makes so much money to say, "Oh yeah, it's really simple." Has he ever been in a situation or lived in a situation where you've struggled like that? Because I have. I've experienced both worlds. I've experienced my wife having a career, having a far better career and higher paying career than I had. And when we first started to have children, that was the thing. And we had a very, very rough transition because we desired to do this. We desired for her to stay home at a certain point. She didn't stay home right away when she started having kids, and to go down to a single income. And a single income that was less than she was making, would she have been, continuing to work and trying to transition our lives and smooth everything out that way, which is something we're still dealing with now that we are a single income family and my wife stays home and now we have more children. So I get the struggle, and I know countless friends who are going through the same thing of trying to make it in a Western society with Bidenomics or whatever, you want to call it, with all these different factors. So it's hard for, a multi-million-dollar football player to make those comments. I found it interesting that it wasn't until, his speech was, if you read it, it was probably about 15 minutes long. It wasn't until the last, 4 or 5 minutes or so that he starts talking about this Catholic homemakers thing in terms of motherhood. And I think he did a really good job about it. There wasn't much critique there in terms of what he said about it. And he did balance it. He followed it up by commenting about absent fathers. He said fathers need to stay in the household as well and be present. And that's the thing that also relates to the single income working father thing, is that it's hard. I see a lot of, good traditional dads who are working multiple jobs, who, yes, they're providing from their family, but they have to work multiple jobs to do so. So they're out of the house the majority of the time. And what kind of effect is that having on the mother, and how stressed is she because she's home, up until bedtime? It's not like the guy gets off at 5. So I thought he was pretty balanced there. But the TLM thing, I laughed out loud several times, honestly, when he starts talking about the TLM stuff. It's naive. First of all, he said stuff like the TLM is basically necessary for your life. So imagine that. If the TLM didn't exist, if Pope Francis totally abrogates it, somehow we're going to die because the TLM is necessary for our life. And it's in fact so essential that you have to move to find one. So you have to move to find a TLM. In fact, if you get a job in a state that doesn't have the TLM, or in a diocese that doesn't have the TLM, you shouldn't take that job, because you need to think about not only what you do, but where you live. And
that's a reality too, Kyle. That's a thing. People really, that's a thing. That's amazing.
Yeah. He's like, go try to find a good bishop. And that's one of the things I learned very early on in my Catholic journey, is that you don't go bishop chasing, because look at all the people who did that with Strickland. Oh, I'm going to move to Strickland's diocese and become a seminarian. I'm going to go in Strickland's diocese. Oh, look what happens to him. Bishops can get moved around like cards in a card deck at the will of, the Holy Father. So don't go bishop chasing. Doesn't often work out. And don't determine your career or where you're going to, just get a job. If you can get a job somewhere and it doesn't happen to have the TLM or a reverend notice, just make it. You're trying to provide for your family. First of all, you got to take care of those necessities first, and then do your best when it comes to liturgy.
This is the most contrarian things, our viewers are going to hear in a very long time, and there's a whole show I'm going to do on this. Content spoiler alert. The true, you guys ready? Here we go. 3, 2, 1, blast off. The true traditional Latin Mass is the Novus Ordo. Would you like me to explain? You don't believe in
shots fired.
I got our theme music playing since it's so important.
The Latin. Oh, I thought we were about to go off air. I was like, dang, right when I do my mic drop.
It's like cutting them off.
We don't believe in sola scriptura. We believe in tradition as Catholics, whether you're Novus Ordo or whatever, right? We are in the Latin Rite. What is the ordinary expression of worship in the Latin Rite? The Novus Ordo. So the traditional Latin Mass is the Novus Ordo. What they really mean is Tridentine Mass. They need to get their words right. But whenever you say traditional Latin Mass, if you want to be really technical, it's actually the Novus Ordo. Think about it. It's the ordinary expression. That's why they call it the extraordinary, because it's the Tridentine Mass. So I think he should have used Tridentine more. I think all the people who push the TLM, I think they should get their words right. They're using the wrong T word. It's Tridentine Latin Mass.
Or just go straight up Missal of 1962. I tried that for a while, but that became a mouthful.
But how does that square with Quo Primum, though? Because they love them some Quo Primum, But I mean, that was what, 1500s or whenever.
Stop it with the
that's a modernist. 1962. That's the year that modernism took over the church.
Call it the reform Quo Primum, right? It's been changed many times since then. So.
It has.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. So the last thing we want to have the final word on is, I think this is our third show. I think in all our shows we engaged in a little bit of the culture, talked a little bit about politics, especially since this is election year. There's a Donald Trump, former president, number 45. He, they have him pretty much with an ankle bracelet in New York, right? So he has to be in New York because of this criminal trial that's ended, and the jury is deliberating now. And he's like, hey, while I'm here, I'm going to campaign. So he's been doing local things, whether it's been visiting going to funerals, visiting bodegas, where things have happened. And last week he had a rally in the Bronx, New York. There's been rap songs made about the Bronx. It's just an iconic place in New York City, predominantly Black and Hispanic. And so he's there, and the Democrats were quite surprised that the turnout was larger than expected. Typically at President Trump's rallies, people travel from far off to go to these rallies, but everyone CNN had talked to at this rally, with a lot of them just locals, like, hey, we live here and we like Trump, because what the Democrats doing, sucks right now. And so CNN was just kind of thrown aback by this whole thing. And I don't, my thoughts, my word on this is that I'm always suspicious of the so-called Black American vote for Republican. I do think that Black Americans may be warming up to Trump. Maybe a lot of them we're realizing that, hey man, maybe we were wrong. Maybe there is some sort of awakening. Maybe. I just don't know whether that actually translates into votes, right? A lot of these guys that showed up at this rally have active cases. Some people we had on the stage have active felony cases, so they can't even vote anyway right now. So I just don't know whether it translates to votes, but man, it's just really interesting. And I'm really happy to see President Trump go to places where they say a Republican can't win.
I mean, people forget. I mean, he's campaigning among his own. He's a New Yorker. He's from New York. New York is Trump country. Head of Trump Tower, head of his Trump organization. That's why the trial is based there, because all of his supposed crimes happen there. But I mean, it's kind of like a Democrat campaigning in Texas. Is it worth it? Who knows? I mean, in 80 and 84, Reagan landslided in New York. He killed Carter in New York in 80 and killed Mondale in New York in 84. So it can be done. It's been done before. And the conditions are very similar if you parallel Jimmy Carter with Joe Biden. I mean, high inflation, unrest in the Middle East, America was weak. And all those blue states were crimson red. So it can happen again. But back then we didn't have election rigging. So, let's not forget about that. By the way, YouTube updated their policy, so I'm not jeopardizing our channel.
Nice.
We can talk about what happened in 2020,
I love the bravado of Trump going into the Bronx, going into a place where Republican candidates, they just bypass it because they're thinking about this as a consumer. What can I get out of it? Oh, if I can't get a lot of votes, I'm not going to that place. Well, how does that show that you really care about this country? And the bravado of Trump to just go in and say, hey, I don't care. I don't care if I lose this state, if I lose this district. I know there are people there who support me. I don't care if there's 5 people there. I'll go talk to these 5 people. I mean, a sizable crowd did show up. And the crowd is that, it was beautiful to see that these people just weren't a bunch of rich elites, because this is what the left was predicting. Oh, it's Trump, and he's just going to bring all of his rich friends down from Staten Island or, Manhattan or wherever. And that's not who showed up. Who showed up? A very diverse crowd. We had people of color. We had all different people from different types of walks of life. And this is what true diversity is when different types of people gather around a single cause or idea or person, MAGA movement, whatever you want to call it. That's the beauty of diversity, is not just the diversity itself and for its own sake. It's that they're rallying around something that they believe in, and something that's, many people feel like is the right direction for this country in terms of having Trump do his next 4 years. And, the unfortunate thing is that these people were degraded even before they showed up, because you had Governor Kathy Hochul say, oh, who's Trump going to bring? And she says, I'll tell you, it's not going to make a difference at all. Donald Trump is going to be the ringleader and invite all of his clowns to a place like the Bronx. So even before these people showed up, they were being called clowns.
Yeah.
The governor of New York.
And I could vouch for that. It kind of reminds me, it brings back memories of 4 years ago. For those of you that don't know, I mean, I was very, very active with the Black Voices for Trump organization, especially here in Detroit. And what was interesting is Joe Biden had 0 black outreach in the city of Detroit. And Donald Trump had his own headquarters in Detroit called, it was Black Voices for Trump on Livernois and 7 Mile. And we literally went out into the inner city. We went door to door in black neighborhoods trying to get black people to vote for Trump. And you would be amazed at how many blacks supported Donald Trump. Some of them were in the closet about it. I talked to black men who hid from their wives that they were voting for Trump. That's a whole show. That's a whole, happy wife, happy life show we could crap all over. But, but so that's what Trump does. He goes in places that are unlikely to vote for him, because there are a lot of people actually in those places that really would vote for him, that really did vote, but they were disenfranchised due to the 2020 thing. Because I'm telling you, I believe Trump had over 30. I know for a fact that Trump had over 30% of the black vote in 2020, like 100%.
Yeah. And you're not supposed to lose at the proportions of the Black American and Hispanic vote that he had. So you're not supposed to lose, and he had it. So that's amazing. But yeah, I do like and Kyle, you made a great point too about his bravado, because I think recently, maybe over the weekend, he went into some sort of libertarian convention, and this dude asked for the Libertarians' nomination. He goes into their convention. He says, if you're not going to nominate me, vote for me. And he's getting booed like he hasn't been booed since, I don't know who he's ever been booed in his life like this, but they're booing this guy like crazy. But the bravado, like, that's going into somebody's house and saying, hey, give me your wife. It was crazy.
That's Trump.
He's got that swag, man. That New York businessman swag. Trump is hilarious. I mean, I'm not, the biggest Trump guy. There's a lot of stuff I disagree, a lot of critique we can give him, but he's just darn entertaining for one thing. I mean, that's at the end of the day, I mean, you got to get that at least out of Trump.
Yeah. Keith asked, how would you stop the Dems from cheating and stealing the election again? Another person has said, no, it can be done. The Democrats got the whole thing rigged. So, and Bobby, I know you've like I said, you worked at Chicago. I mean, at Detroit market like nothing else, man. What are your thoughts on, like, hey, the Democrats, they did it before, they can do it again. They got
I mean, if anybody wants
They
to,
play by a different set of rules, and we found that out.
I mean, if anybody wants to cyber stalk my Facebook page, I mean, you could see, I was at the TCF Center. It's currently called Huntington Place, but TCF Center we used to call Cobo Hall. You know that, Kyle, here in downtown Detroit. And I was literally there. You could see it on my cell phone camera as they were putting the pizza boxes up to cover the windows while the count was happening in Wayne County. You know, I have friends on the inside that testified under 5 years of perjury of the fraud that they witnessed firsthand, of them escorting Republican canvassers out to applause, people wearing Black Lives Matter shirts, which they were forbidden from wearing. Can't wear any kind of political memorabilia. They were wearing Biden shirts. Every time a Republican leaves, a Democrat has to come in. But they would send in, 2 or 3 Democrats every time a Republican. There were all kinds of election irregularities at the TCF Center where all the votes were counted for Wayne County. And I truly believe that the events of that swayed the election because Trump lost Michigan over that. And had he won Michigan, things would have gone very differently. So, and then, you fast forward to the 2022 midterms, and we were focused on Proposal 3 up here in Michigan, which is horrible because it enshrined abortion in our Constitution. We're basically like kind of the California of the Midwest now when it comes to that. But another proposal that they enshrined were proposals 1 and 2 that pretty much locked in Democrats forever. I mean, we're talking 9-day elections. We're talking just all kinds of horrible things. So I couldn't see Michigan ever going red again with all the changes they made to the voting process. We've kind of become their Texas, I mean, you're here local too, Kyle. What do you think of all that as far as
Yeah, no, I was really, you mentioned the Prop 3 here, and this was an issue I really felt strong about. I wrote an article at the time for the Catholic media outlet that I was working for, and it was called "Shame on You, Michigan," because with all the talk and all the fighting and all the praying that we did to thanks be to God, affect what we did through Trump. I'll admit that, through Trump, through the Supreme Court of the United States. I didn't think I was ever going to see that in my lifetime, honestly. So we saw the issue get pushed back to the states. But as many people predicted, and rightly so, the pro-life movement dropped the ball. And we're seeing state after state fall to these people who are continuing the fight on their side, on the pro-death side, to push legislation. They were waiting in the wings. They were waiting in the wings to affect these, to fight against the trigger laws, to start working towards, at least on the state level, constitutionalizing, the right to kill a child in the womb. All this stuff, they were well organized, as the left always is, because they have the time for it, because they're not out there having kids and having large families and going to church and but that's what conservatives are doing. So that's sort of the catch-22 of conservative political action, is that we always are focused on living our lives and worshiping our God and spending time with our families. The people on the left don't do that. They sit in front of their computers all day and tweet and get into online wars with people about their political opinions. I mean, people on the right do that too, but it's more predominant on the left, I would say. And we dropped the ball. The pro-lifers dropped the ball. We dropped the ball here in Michigan on a political level, on a spiritual level, and this thing was passed, and it's now going to be super hard to go back, and it's going to be a harder fight than even it was on the national level, I think. And then so that's the life issue.
I mean, are we the North and South of our time when it are we the abolitionists of our time? Because I think what do you guys see? Like, do you guys see the country going half and half? Half the states will enshrine it. I think it'd be more 2/3, 1/3. 2/3 will accept abortion, 1/3 won't, and maybe 1/3's a little high, in my opinion.
Man, Bobby, after what happened in Ohio, I think it can go 100%. I think they have the money, and I think they have the emotions. And I think as long as they put weed on the ballot with abortion, I think you can get enough people who want to smoke weed and enough people who want to sacrifice their child to, especially if it's like Ohio, you only need a majority, 51%. Now, states, I don't like, that's one thing I don't know about all the states. Is most states more responsible, 65%. But if the majority of states are just 51%, just one 50% plus one, then dude, I think all the states, even Alabama, Mississippi, you throw the money in there, you throw the emotion, throw some John Legends, some celebrities in there. Oh, come on, man.
I'll humble myself and say that for decades, my argument always used to be, well, if Roe versus Wade's repealed, it'll go back to the states. And now I feel like a Kentucky Fried Idiot for saying that all those years, because look at what happens when it goes back to the states. I guess I underestimated how wicked each of these individual states would be. So yeah, I think we could see worse than Roe v. Wade. I think you're right. I think we could see 100, maybe like one state, like, you know, Montana or something, will be like the only state to not allow it. But yeah, it could be.
And
worse than
I
Roe v.
think that's
Wade.
because we changed the law, but we didn't change hearts, right? We didn't. We just haven't effectively communicated that this is child sacrifice, and it is evil, and it is a sin. And this it's our failure. We didn't do what we failed to do.
Yeah. It's going to be a long haul. Still, we have a long fight to do, especially on the state level. It's really hard to say what is going to be the future of the pro-life movement. Now it's interesting, David, you tied that into, well, just conjoin it with weed, put that on the ballot, and that seems to go together for whatever reason. Just randomly curious, what are the marijuana laws over in Germany like? Because where Bobby and I live in Michigan,
every other billboard.
Oh my gosh, every billboard you drive down, there's a pot shop on every corner. You smell it everywhere. I used to live very close to what we call 8 Mile, which is traditionally the dividing line between the suburbs and Detroit proper. And drive down 8 Mile, it's everywhere. Strip club, pot shop, liquor store, strip club, pot shop, liquor store. We even have legal in a few cities, we have legalized medicinal mushrooms now. Psilocybin mushrooms you can take, so what's going on over there in Germany with this stuff?
Yeah, it's interesting because it is legal, right? But it's just like alcohol, you could drink it, I think at the age of 14 or 16 or something like that. So so even though it's legal, there's a lot more moderation with these things, right? So it's not so you don't see that, right? It's not the big business industry that it is that you find in the States. It's the same way with brothels as well. You do see, you pass by a brothel, you can see it, whorehouse. But it's seems to be moderation. There's no line outside. It's not, people, it's not a big business type of thing. People aren't really trying to. Now, Amsterdam is a different issue because in Amsterdam, you go there and you do have that streets where, but it's more like a party type of scene. So, I think the main difference is I think there's a lot of, maybe because it's new there's just a lot of commercialization and corporate greed surrounded upon ruining people's lives. Over here, for whatever reason, there just seems to be a lot more social responsibility in regards to that, because corporations do operate a little. It's not as greedy over here for whatever reason. Yeah, but Kyle, you it was interesting, man. You dropped your first podcast this week, even Keel. What I learned 2 things. I learned I had no idea who Destiny was. I never heard. I'm not a gamer, and so I had never heard of this Destiny. But I did a cut up for you today. I mean, Jordan Peterson destroyed this guy. It's like embarrassing, and so I learned that. That was awesome. And then also, I really like your end segment as well, where you do apologetics at the end. So, man, kudos to you, man, for that great first episode 1.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's going to be an exciting endeavor. It was fun dropping episode 1. And I hope people enjoy. I hope that I'm gaining a new audience, a new following here over at St. Dominic's Media. I'm very excited to be here with you guys, and I thank you, David, for having me on. It's interesting. I wanted to bring this up at some point. This really doesn't have to do with my show. But speaking of episode 1, I'm thinking of Star Wars, right? And we talked earlier about Pope Francis's 60 Minutes interview. Is this not episode 1? This thumbnail for
oh my gosh.
Look at that.
It does look like a Phantom Menace.
What is that? I don't know where they got.
Is that really the thumbnail for that?
That's seriously the CBS thumbnail on their YouTube. I think their official YouTube channel for that interview. I'm like,
wow,
dude, that's Star Wars. That's like the crappy episode 1 through 3.
Wow.
Yes, but thank you. Even Keel with Kyle Kopy, trying to give a level-headed perspective of things going on in the church and the culture and whatever I feel like talking about, basically. Trying to keep faithful Catholics on the bark of Peter. It's going to be hopefully a weekly show, and I hope people continue to join me. So thank you.
Yeah, man. And Bobby, you have you say you dropping something sooner than later on what were you just now talking about?
Yeah, it's the month of the Sacred Heart, and
yeah,
I got some content I'll be dropping on that, and also going a little bit more into a lot of apologetics that I've kind of set down over the years, and that I'm going to be picking back up, and I'm going to be doing the apologetics of today. And to me, it seems like a lot of the apologetics is towards people who are in the church. I used to direct it towards people that were outside of the church, but now it just seems like a lot of people that are in the church.
Now, how's that different than what like somebody like a Dave Anderson would have done back in the day versus what you think seems to be needed now? What's the distinction?
So my friend Gary Machuda, who's also local here in Michigan, he said that the atheists of today that we're having to do apologetics with were the evangelical Protestants of the early 2000s. Because a lot of them fell away. Because if you think about it, there are some, it's kind of like the book Liberalism as a Sin teaches, that liberalism is the ugly stepchild of Protestantism, because both ideologies, both heresies, are basically at the root of them is protest and disobedience and rejection of the authority of God through the church, right? Some aren't aware that that's what they're doing, but that's what they're doing. So a lot of those evangelicals of the late 90s, early 2000s that we were hitting with 2 Thessalonians 2:16, give them some John chapter 6 uppercuts. They're atheists now, a lot of them, and so a lot of the apologetics of today has to be natural and Christian apologetics, whereas Catholic apologetics is, talking to Protestants. But I think there's a lot of Catholics that are very Protestant that need apologetics on ecclesiology. What is the nature of the church, the nature of the papacy? So there's a need for all of it, which I'm looking forward to tackling, one issue at a time.
Awesome. All right, fellas, this we just came up on 2 hours, man. I got to drop some timestamps in here, but I guess we should head out. Kyle, did you want to give the final word of the final word?
My goodness, put me on the spot like that. Yeah, I don't know. What do we have to say? Be like Dordo. Don't listen to what he tells you about the TLM, and support your local trans hermit because she needs you. And that's about it. Pray for Bishop Stowe. Pray for Bishop Stowe. He needs it. That's my final word.
Awesome. Peace.